Welcome to the Backyard Bounty Podcast from heritageacresmarket.com, where we aim to educate and inspire you by sharing practical information to help your homestead thrive. And now, here's your host, Nicole.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Backyard Bounty. I'm your host, Nicole, and today I'm joined by Chris from MacFarlane Pheasants, and today we are going to talk about, of course, raising pheasants. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about raising pheasants. It's something that I've done. I currently have some pheasants. I've raised ringnecks. I'm also an avid hunter, so this is something that I'm pretty excited to talk to you about. But before we dive into all of that, can you kind of give us some information about the hatchery and your background working there?
Yeah, I've been working at the farm now for 22 years, and I've done everything from raising the chicks to the mature birds, to breeders, to the hatchery. So I've done pretty much everything over the course of those years. So I've seen it from egg all the way through the whole cycle. So it's been a pretty interesting journey to say the least. You know, when I first started, I thought, yeah, pheasants, feed, water, that's got to be pretty easy. And I'm still learning to this day. So it's quite interesting.
Oh, I'm sure. So with your experience on kind of all of the angles, where are you now and which area do you enjoy the most?
Right now, I oversee the logistics side of things because I have the background in everything. I can, making sure we have enough breeders to get enough eggs, to make sure we have enough chicks, to make sure we have enough birds for the hunting season in the fall. So currently that is my role, overseeing, the whole yearly cycle of the pheasants. And I have to say, I certainly enjoy working in the hatchery and the day-old chicks. It's just something. It's pretty rewarding.
Sure, I bet. So, how many birds do you hatch a year or a month, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, we hatch about 2.2 million chicks every year.
Wow.
The bulk of that would be done in the summer months. April through July would be the bulk of the ringneck type things, but we do hatch year-round, especially our white pheasants that we use for dress products.
Gotcha. So you mentioned the ringnecks and the dress products, so hunting and apparel, I assume, and then what else do you guys raise pheasants for?
We raise them for, like I said, dress birds, smoked birds, table birds, meat birds, that kind of thing. We raise about 150,000 a year pheasants for that purpose. They're actually unique in the regards that they're white and they're not, what you think of as a typical pheasant.
Sure.
They won't have the dark pin feathers and are a lot more appetizing on the table than the regular ringnecks.
And then do you sell their feathers as well, or any other byproducts of the bird?
On the white pheasant, we sell everything except the feathers, actually. We use everything from the feet to the bones. We are starting a new dog food, pet food type adventure, and we are able to utilize pretty much the entire bird in that regards.
Interesting. And one thing that I thought was really interesting when I was looking at your website was that you ship the chicks worldwide, which, I mean, there's logistical challenges just getting birds state to state. And so I thought that was really interesting. Do you just have the one hatchery or do you have multiple locations around the world?
No, we just have the one hatchery. Everything comes right out of Janesville, Wisconsin. And certainly, nowadays with the red tape that's involved with getting them, out of the country, there's certainly a challenge in that respect. Shipping the birds themselves is actually quite easy. Birds can live on their yolk sac for 3 days without any food and water, and we can get them to their destinations, usually overnight. So shipping them is not the problem. It's the red tape and getting them across, to other countries.
Sure. Well, interesting. So with that being said, what are some reasons that the individual, backyard hobby farmer or that kind of person, why would they want to raise pheasants? I know that I've had them just for entertainment and to let loose, but what do you typically see as reasons that people would have them?
A couple of reasons that I've seen over the years. One would be they're just looking for something to do, occupy their time. They love to hunt, and it's a way to train their dogs and get out and enjoy the hunting experience kind of in the non-hunting season. certainly hunting preserves, would raise them for that reason to release in the fields and then go hunt. And people will even raise them for meat. And I've even seen people raise them for pets. Like you said, they just like to have them around and like to see them around, and they release them and they just kind of hang around the yard and come and go as they please.
Yeah, I think they're gorgeous birds, and I've always enjoyed having them around. I don't know that if you would know the answer to this, but is there any legal restrictions that you know of as far as folks letting them loose on purpose?
There's a certain number. I don't know what that number is. You would have to have a game farm license to release them for whatever purpose that you have. And I know that it's up to the individual to know what they are responsible to have. We don't have to check papers on anyone. It's
Sure.
they would have to be responsible for with the numbers and any permits that they would need.
So when it comes to raising the pheasants, I thought we could talk a little bit about the actual getting chicks and raising them. But before going into that in more detail, can you raise pheasants with chickens, and what kind of housing requirements do they need?
So I never recommend raising pheasants with chickens or turkeys or really any other type of game birds at all. Pheasants are a wilder bird, especially than a chicken or even domesticated turkey. The chickens can give the pheasants, diseases that the pheasants are not immune to, and vice versa. The pheasants can get the chickens sick as well. So it's better to really keep them apart, not raise them together, and even to take a step further, keep them separated, where they can't intermingle between pens or are right next to each other, where they could touch each other. You want to keep them as separate as you can.
Would that be blackhead, or is it other diseases?
There was lots of different other diseases. Blackhead is certainly one of them, but they can, transmit other things, cholera or, even coccidiosis, some of the common diseases like that.
Sure. And you mentioned not having them with turkeys and things. Is that because of the disease as well?
Yeah, twofold. One is the disease reasons, and two, the nutritional requirements would be different. You can't feed them both correctly at the same time.
Sure. So what are their nutritional needs?
Well, when they're younger, they will need a higher protein and a higher energy diet. That's when their immune system's developing, and they're developing the quickest. And typically that'd be a 28 or 30% protein level. Once they get outside, they can go on a grower type ration until they're about 18, 19 weeks old, which is considered a mature pheasant. And after they are fully mature, they can go on a maintenance ration, which is a lower protein, about 14% protein, lower energy, lower calorie type diet. Keeps the fat off them, keeps them lean.
And is that something, if you're planning on keeping them kind of long term as pets, that they can just stay on that for the rest of their life?
Yeah, that maintenance type ration, absolutely. And if you're keeping them for pets, the other thing, they're out and about too. They're probably eating bugs and worms and everything else that's out and about.
Sure.
But for the purposes of raising pheasants commercially, it's important to having the right nutrition for the birds.
So kind of looking at the housing again, I was really surprised because I've had lots of different birds. I've had guinea fowl, and I've had, I still have some red golden pheasants and stuff. I was really surprised at how much flightier and I guess more wild the ringnecks were. I don't really know why that was a surprise to me, but it was. So what is an ideal confinement pen for them, especially if you're wanting to keep them more on a long-term scale?
Well, I think you hit it on the head, is that they are a wilder bird, which makes them more aggressive. So if you're wanting to, keep them together, you need to give them more room than you would a chicken or something, because they're not as docile as a chicken, and they'll get aggressive and they'll fight each other and cause all kinds of problems. So your pen in and of itself should have some kind of cover in it, whether that's corn or weeds or some kind of place they can get out of the sun and the wind, that kind of stuff. And if you're going to not put any kind of anti-pick device on the birds at all, you're going to need to give the birds about 50 square feet of room for every bird that you have in the pen. So you can kind of do the math and figure it out. But if you are putting an anti-pick device on the birds, which kind of keeps them from seeing and picking on each other as much, you can get away with about 25 square feet for a bird, so about half density.
Okay. I accidentally let one of my hens loose because I didn't know that there was a hole in the roof netting. So I imagine that's probably an important aspect.
Yes, I've had a few holes over the years. Yeah, they seem to find it. Pheasants are interesting characters. They spend their whole life trying to figure out how to get out of the pen, and once they get out, they find the rest of their time getting back in. So that's interesting.
I guess I haven't had that same luck. Once mine got out, it was gone.
Gone.
I never saw it again. So I guess with that being said, if you are wanting to let them loose, I mean, obviously they're not going to be like free range chickens where you can let them out and then put them away at night. But do they tend to stay close?
They will, especially if you've got the food and water. They're smart. They can get habituated just like anything else. They know where the food and the water is. I even know of people that blow a whistle and the pheasants come back because they know that's feeding time. So it really depends what you're trying to do. If you really want them to survive, the best thing is to put them out there and not have the feed and the water source and let them find it on their own. Is the best advice I can give.
So they can typically survive pretty well outside of confinement?
They can survive just fine. Pheasants are very hardy. They'll have no problem finding the feed or the water. Even if they're raised in a pen, they won't have any trouble finding feed and water. That would be not the issue. The issue would be predators. It takes a couple times for them to, near misses by a hawk, before they realize that, hey, this hawk is a problem, So it's
Sure.
really predators that would cause the problem, not so much the hardiness of the birds or finding food and water.
So you mentioned the anti-pecking device, and I have heard stories about them being pretty cannibalistic, but I've also heard that being an issue when raising chicks. So I was wondering if we could talk more about kind of the process of raising chicks and how much space that you would need for something like that.
So for chicks, to raise them from 0 to 6 week inside of a building, you need about 1.6 square feet for every chick that's in that barn. And you can kind of, do the math based on that. If you start putting more chicks than that in, they start to get aggressive. They start to pick on each other. You'll find bare backs and wings, picked up heads, and it can cause problems, just like it would in mature birds. The chicks will start to get aggressive, after the first week. So you really need to keep an eye on them. You can kind of keep the aggressiveness down by turning the lights down, keeping it a little darker in the room, maybe using red lights. That seems to keep them a little bit calmer. And once the birds hit to be about 4.5 or 5 weeks, you can put that anti-pick device on them, and that will pretty much, keep them from picking at that point in the barns. Now, they will still pick with that anti-pick device on, just to be clear. If you put them out at like 10 square feet outside, out in the pens, they can still pick, but it greatly reduces the damage they can do to each other.
Gotcha. And so with raising chicks, I know that you touched on their nutritional needs, but I assume that the temperatures and things are probably similar to chickens as far as like the brooder temperatures.
I'm not as familiar with chickens, to be quite honest. I can tell you that when you first start the chicks, when they're day old, you're looking for about 90 to 100 degrees right under the brooder would be the typical thing. And as the birds get older, I believe you can drop the temperature much quicker on the pheasants because I think they're a little bit hardier bird.
Oh, okay.
The big thing is you want to get the temperature down to what it is outside before you move them outside, or it's going to cause big problems.
And what about hatching eggs or breeding the birds in captivity? I guess starting with hatching eggs. Are eggs easily hatched in kind of the residential setting, or are they kind of more difficult to hatch?
No, they're easily hatched. They require, just like anything else, a certain temperature and humidity. And as long as that's all constant, they hatch fairly well. What kind of hatch rate would you be looking at? Probably in the neighborhood of 80% of the eggs would hatch. So it's a fairly high number.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And what about then breeding? Do they breed in captivity? And if so, will they sit on their own eggs, or is it kind of something that you would need to take the eggs and incubate yourself?
We would pull them and incubate them myself. So pheasants are colony breeders. So we will put one rooster for every 10 hens in a pen, and that is enough to keep all the eggs fertile. You get more than if you put one rooster for every 8 hens. The roosters will start beating up on the hens a little bit, and you get 12 or 14 hens for every rooster, and they're not fertile they just can't keep up, and you get a lot of infertile eggs. So they're colony breeders, and we go in there and pick them up 4 to 6 times a day.
Oh, wow.
And we're always collecting the eggs. It keeps the number of broken eggs down. It's not saying you don't get a broody hen every once in a while who tries to sit on her eggs and protect her eggs. That happens once in a while, but generally it's not a thing.
So can you have multiple roosters in with the hens, or does that cause an issue?
No, that's not an issue. And it's actually kind of neat to watch, because if you have a pen of 300 hens, you put 30 roosters in there, all the roosters have their own territory, and you can see them. And if another rooster walks into the territory, they get all puffed up and start fighting. And this is my territory. The hens come in there. That's the ones they breed. It's very interesting to watch.
Huh. Yeah, I don't imagine, most people are able to experience that many birds just due to square footage restrictions. It's hard for most people to have a big flight pen or something like that. So what are some sort of beginner mistakes or common questions that you guys hear when folks are getting into raising pheasants?
I think the common mistake is that they would treat a pheasant like they would a chicken or some other domesticated bird. And it doesn't work with the nature of a pheasant. You have to treat it differently. It's a unique animal or a unique bird that has to be treated as such. And, most of the problems that I help people with, it would be, they're trying to feed it like a chicken, or they got too many birds in the pen. So that's probably the most common mistake, is just people don't realize that it's a wild bird, and it needs to be treated like that and raised like as such.
That's definitely something that I experienced too. It just didn't click with me when I first got them, and so definitely had to make some adjustments as we went along with them. But they are definitely a fun bird to raise. I've enjoyed having them.
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you over the years that, especially with pheasants, I don't want to say they take care of themselves, but if you watch them, they will tell you what's wrong with them. And I've really enjoyed it over the years, just learning that aspect of it. If the birds are hot, how do they act? If they're cold, how do they act? When they're not quite feeling well, how do they act? How do they look? And if you're really paying attention to those little things, it makes life so much easier when you're raising the birds. If you can really hone in on what the birds are telling you, it makes things so much easier.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I know that I'm able to do that with the chickens now. I assume that with the pheasants, that's something where you just kind of would need to be around them more and learn their mannerisms and to know when they're not acting normal.
Yeah, so when it just comes with time. That's exactly it. It's not something you can teach or show. It just, you can point it out when you see it, but unless you're around them and know how they act normally, it's pretty subtle.
Sure. So obviously your pheasant farm supplies pheasants to those that would like to raise them. So can you give us your website and tell us about the products that you sell as well?
Sure. Our website is pretty simple. It's www.pheasant.com, just onepheasant.com. So and if you type in pheasant to the web browser, ours comes up. I think it's first. It might be second, but it will pop up. And on our website, we have got everything on there from buying day-old chicks, mature bird quotes, how to build flight pens. There's a lot of videos on there on just how-to videos, how to peep birds, how to build a pen, why we do what we do. And it's very informative. If you just want to get in there and dig around a little bit, you would be able to see, a lot of what it takes to raise pheasants commercially. So there's a lot of good information there. We sell dress birds, smoke birds. We have pheasant pot pies. Recently, we've got into pheasant broths, which are excellent, along with pheasant snack sticks. And we have also just launched a brand of dog food and pet treats that are quite interesting as well.
Wonderful. And of course, we'll put a link to that below. And I assume that if somebody is looking into getting birds and they have some more specific questions than kind of the overview that we covered here, that they can reach out to you guys as well.
Absolutely. All of our contact information is on the website. My contact information is on the website, and certainly someone would feel free to call as well. We supply anyone who wants 30,000 birds up to 3 birds, so it really doesn't matter.
Wonderful. Well, Chris, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for talking pheasants with me today.
Thanks, Nicole. I appreciate it.
And for those listening, thank you so much for joining me for another episode, and we'll see you again next week.
To access behind-the-scenes content, sign up for notifications, leave a question or comment for the show, and so much more. Text the word podcast to 719-292-3207 or visit heritageacresmarket.com/podcast.